Well, it was on successive evenings this week that Ashley Giles and Chris Silverwood left their jobs as managing director and head coach respectively of the England men's team following the 4-0 Ashes hammering in Australia. It's left Strauss to come in as the temporary director of cricket, and his first job is to look for an interim head coach for the 3-test tour of the West Indies in March. On a wet Friday morning at Lord's, Strauss and Tom Harrison faced the media to explain how decisions have been taken and what happens next. I spoke to both men, starting with Strauss, who first explained another departure from the England setup, that of assistant coach Graham Thorpe.
On the back of the Ashes, I think there's been a reflection on what's the right environment to take the team forward into the next cycle, and obviously there have been some decisions made, firstly with Chris Silverwood as head coach and now with Graham Thorpe as batting coach. I mean, they've both given huge service to the England cricket team over a long period of time, and most particularly in recent times in very, very challenging circumstances with bubbles and COVID life, etc. But you know, the game of cricket always moves forward, and it's important that right at the moment we have some fresh thinking in and around that leadership group, and certainly from a batting perspective, our batting productivity needs to be better. I don't think anyone can deny that, and so you know, maybe some fresh thinking, fresh voices in that regard can help.
We know how challenging the past couple of years have been, particularly with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. You know just what it's like to be in that England dressing room, having taken on a number of roles. Given those challenges and maybe how up against it England were in Australia, is it fair that these three guys have paid with their jobs?
Well, listen, I think there's been a lot of mitigating circumstances, and by the way, the schedule over the last 18 months, A, has been very demanding, and B, has been very high quality against some very good teams. But our ambitions with English cricket is not to make up the numbers. Our ambitions have got to be the number one team in all formats, and for the last 12 months or so, the England cricket team, test team, it's hard to say we've moved forwards, and I suppose these decisions have been made to try and help that process happen, to move the England cricket team forward, to get some fresh voices in there, to get some fresh thinking, to challenge the players in different ways, and to move the whole environment forward.
And just specifically in relation to Chris Silverwood, what about the job that he's been asked to do, not only as head coach, but also as with final responsibility for selection as well?
Well, I think that's been very, very challenging, and one of the recommendations from the Cricket Committee panel to the board was that structure placed a very, very tough burden on the England coach, and I think one thing we need to look at is what's the right structure to aid best practice decision making. Like, how do we make sure those decisions are being made as well as possible? Generally, that requires some really good information gathering. It requires the people in and around the environment to have a strong voice, but it also requires a voice from outside of that setup as well, to ask the right questions, to check and challenge, and to give a very fresh perspective on things. So I think that's one of the things that clearly I'm going to have to look at over the coming days and weeks.
Just to be absolutely clear with regards to your personal situation, do you see this as just a temporary role that you're taking on at the moment?
Absolutely, yeah. So my role is to man the fort, so to speak, until a new managing director of England cricket is appointed.
So what happens now with regard to the West Indies? I mean, you're going to have to move quickly, aren't you, in terms of not only finding a coach, but also naming a squad?
Correct, yes. I mean, the team lead on the 24th of February. The sooner we can select the team, the better, so that everyone knows where they stand. And in order to do that, it's highly preferable that we got the interim coach in place before there. So there's a lot of work to do over the next few days. Obviously, that process has started, but we'll make announcements when we're ready to do so.
Where are you looking for that interim coach? Is that potentially someone who's internal and already in the setup, or might it be someone coming in from outside?
I think we're looking at both. You know, I think there are pros and cons to both. I mean, there are a lot of pros to the internal candidate, just because that person will know the players and they'll know the coaches and they'll have a good feeling of where people are psychologically, etc. The advantage of someone from outside the setup, of course, is that they can look at everything with fresh eyes and ears, but it's only a very short tour, and we will have a New England coach, or perhaps more than one New England coach down the track, probably for the start of the English summer. So that fresh perspective will be coming. The question is, do we get value out of doing it over this West Indies tour as well.
And Joe Root will be captain in the West Indies?
Yes, he will. Yeah, absolutely. I've spoken to Joe Root a number of times actually recently, and he's steadfast in his determination and motivation to take that team forward. He's hurt by what happened in Australia and actually over the last 12 months as well, and I think he's got some clear thoughts about how best to take the England cricket team forward. He's a great example, isn't he, to the players and the staff, both in terms of his performance and how he lives his life, and he'll do a great job in the West Indies.
Just to explain what might happen going forward, will the new director of cricket appoint the new head coach, or might you have some input in that?
No, I think that's the way it should work. You know, that person needs to have the right coaching set up for him, and so the sooner we get that director of cricket in place, the better for everyone. But we can't rush the process. We've got to think about, is the director of cricket role, should it be exactly the same one that I did in Ashley Giles, or should we tweak that role, and then who are the best candidates to fill that moving forwards? Having
said that, I know you're saying that someone else will appoint the head coach, but you will have some views on maybe what that new head coach should take on. I know we've just touched on the selection issue. Is the job of the England head coach now too big for someone to be in charge of both red ball and white ball formats?
Well, look, we've had head coaches that have been able to do it, you know, and you look at Flower and Fletcher and Trevor Bayliss, etc. So it's doable, but the question is it optimal to do it that way? And so those are sort of considerations that we've got to put into it. Clearly, there are some advantages to having separate coaches in terms of that each coach being able to focus on one form of the game and having some rest in between those series, and to work with players who are just specialists in that format, etc. The downside is, of course, lack of continuity. So you've got to weigh those up against each other and make a decision from there.
Going back to the selection issue, should there be that independent voice, maybe from outside the dressing room, giving views on the selection?
I believe there's value in that, personally. And I know that other people see it in different ways, and people will talk about accountability and responsibility for the head coach, but I just think that there is so much work done these days on player identification and selection that it's impossible to dump that all on the coach, in my opinion. I think that's a hard thing for that coach to be able to deal with.
When Chris Silver was appointed, Ashley Giles was quite keen on appointing a homegrown coach. What's your view on that? Should the next England coach be from England?
Yeah, I'm completely agnostic to that. I think you try and get the best person. We've had brilliant foreign coaches previously. We've had good homegrown coaches as well. Let's just find the best people for the job.
Could that best person potentially be Justin Langer?
Well, he will be one of the names. I mean, obviously, none of us know what's going on with Australia quite at the moment. So, I think it's a bit premature to be talking about Justin Langer in that role. But I think he's got a lot of capabilities. I know him well from my time at Middlesex. But there are going to be a lot of good quality people out there that will be tempted by the England coaching position. This is one of the great coaching gigs, I think. And I'm sure that the candidates will reflect that.
You were the captain of an England team that won in Australia, that was ranked as the best test team in the world. Maybe looking back to that and comparing it to the situation that we're in now, what needs to change in our domestic game to ensure that players are best prepared for the test arena?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking back to my time, I mean, in early 2009, the team wasn't in that dissimilar situation to where we are right at the moment when I took over as captain and we went to the West Indies with a caretaker coach. And it was only, a couple of years later that we were number one in the world. So it shows that things can change very quickly in international sport. I do think the domestic game's got an important role to play to prepare players for the demands of international cricket, and I'm not sure it's doing that currently. And I'm very open and honest about that. I think the skills that are required at domestic level do not match the skills that are required at international level. So I think we need to look at that and be prepared to be bold and radical with some of the solutions.
And there will be a review into whether or not the domestic game is properly preparing cricketers for the test arena.
That's right. So that was one of the recommendations from the cricket committee panel. That's gone through the board. It's a case of now putting together the sort of terms of reference and obviously the right people being put on that group.
It's a long time since England have won a test series in the West Indies. Given the slightly chaotic nature of the preparation, is now the time for that to be changed?
I certainly hope so, and I think we've fallen into the trap many times of feeling like we can go to the West Indies and we can win. And each time we've gone there with that attitude, we've gone there and lost. So, I think the West Indies are an incredibly talented team. They always have been, and they're very hard to beat in their own conditions. They know those conditions really well. And of course, these days, the pitches out in the West Indies require a really good balance between fast bowling and seam bowling. So, and spin bowling. So, that's the requirements for us, and we've got to just up our levels significantly from where they've been recently.
Well, finally, assuming that you are going to have a hand in the selection of the squad for the tour to the West Indies, can we expect to see some new faces in there?
Well, I think I wouldn't be surprised if there are one or two. I think it's not a case of sort of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. We still got to say who are our best players, and we need to back our best players to go out and perform. But I think that the timescale and the horizon, this being the start of a new cycle, we've also got to think about how we perform away from home generally over the next 2 or 3 years, and maybe selections need to match that.
At the end of the Ashes tour, there was a few players carrying injuries: Joss Buttler, Johnny Bairstow, Ben Stokes. Will they be fit? TBC. I think we'll have a full injury report. I haven't had a chance to look at that yet, so let's have a look at that over the next few days. Joining Andrew Strauss at Lords was ECB Chief Executive Tom Harrison, who himself has come under pressure following a turbulent year for English cricket. When I spoke to Harrison, he addressed calls he has faced to stand down from his position, but started by explaining why he felt there was a need to make changes to the management of the England men's team.
Well, look, I think we've obviously had an opportunity to look in detail and consider reports that have come in from Ashley's, his managing director's report, but also subsequent reports that have been made as well by myself and also Andrew Strauss, following a panel who have looked at the Ashes report in detail. So, look, those decisions have come out of that, and they really reflect, I think, a desire to kind of refresh and move forward with the Test team. We've had a very difficult 12 months. It's been, although we've played some extremely competitive teams, the performances just haven't been good enough. And we need to move forward now, and we felt that the right way to do that is to change the leadership and to move forward, which Andrew Strauss is going to help me with assessing what needs to happen for the West Indies tour, and then putting in a more sort of permanent structure after the West Indies tour before the domestic season starts in the UK.
The last couple of years have been very challenging for quite obvious reasons relating to the pandemic.
Yeah.
And some may say that England might never have had a chance going to Australia given those circumstances. Is it fair then that these guys have paid with their jobs?
Look, I think again it has been a very difficult time, but the reality is we are all, as English cricket fans, we want the England cricket team to be performing well, and we have ambitions around being the best in the world, certainly in the Test environment. The white ball performances have been pretty good. I mean, we've had some hiccups recently, but the white ball team is still, our T20 team is still the number one rated team in the world. So there are some good performances there. But I think this reflects again, do we think this is the right team to take us forward? And I think that the decisions that we've taken around that reflect perhaps a different view on that fresh management around the England team environment is going to be needed for us to fulfil the ambitions that we have around the Test team.
There was an investigation into the incident in Hobart involving Joe Root, James Anderson, Graham Thorpe and some members of the Australia team. Can you bring us up to date on that, please?
Well, it was just an internal thing. I don't think it was described as an investigation. We dealt with that internally, and there's nothing further to add on that.
You were in Australia. What did you see around the culture of the team, and specifically some reports that there was a drinking culture within the England team?
Look, I think we didn't have any discipline-related incidents in Australia that would reflect a massive erosion of the culture that Joe's team subscribed to. I think the pandemic has created other issues and anxieties, and that's something that any player that's been, or management staff member that's been involved in these managed environments over the course of the pandemic would understand and reflect on. It's been extremely challenging. And that has had an impact on performance, but nevertheless, the performances have still not been at the level that we would expect for an England cricket team under any circumstances. So, but what I saw was a team desperate to do well, and very frustrated at the reasons why that wasn't happening. So we have to look deeply into the reasons for that. We have done that, and we felt that the decisions that we've taken are in the best interest of taking the team back to the top of the world, which is where we ultimately want to be.
Moving forward then, the next assignment for the men's team is the West Indies, with Andrew Strauss in a temporary position as Director of Cricket. Can you just explain what's going to happen next? Are you going to need a Director of Cricket before you can, a permanent Director of Cricket before you can appoint a permanent head coach?
Yeah, so first things first, we need to make sure that the setup is right for the West Indies tour. So there's going to be a lot of work done over the course of the next few days to get a temporary coaching structure in place, and to also select the team for the West Indies. That process is underway, and we'll be doing a lot of work around that over the next few days. On the return from the West Indies, we're obviously going to be moving, and during the West Indies tour, looking at the structure and job description around the Managing Director of England cricket role. We've learnt a lot through this pandemic about the changing priorities, the voice of players in particular, and also the kind of the big shifts in world cricket, particularly around white ball cricket and the choices that players have. So there's a lot to grapple with, and the responsibilities of that role will be shifting somewhat. So we need to make sure that we get that absolutely right before we go and search for the right person to come and fulfill that job with us. And at that point, I think we can move towards more permanent coaching appointments once that person's in place.
With regard to the new head coach, should that person have responsible for both red ball and white ball teams?
Yeah.
And should they also retain the responsibility as being the head selector?
Yeah, I mean, you've reflected on something there that has been a real issue, a huge amount of responsibility on the head coach. I think we're going to reflect on that. I certainly think the selection model will change. We've seen the impact of having to select multiple teams at the same time. So when you're focused on a test environment, having to get your mindset around selecting a white ball team for a tour, that's been very difficult and very challenging. So there'll be a number of different reflections, I think, on the basis of what we've learnt over the last couple of years, and make decisions accordingly.
What about the structure of the domestic game and how players are best prepared to play Test cricket?
Yeah, again, one of the recommendations that's come through this week's board meeting is that we do an independent review on how red ball cricket in this country is preparing players for international Test cricket in particular. We had a similar kind of reset in 2015 around the white ball structure, and I think that we can take some of the learnings from that as into a discussion with the game around how we structure our red ball cricket to make sure that we're providing the best kind of entertainment for first class cricket in this country, but also preparing players for the rigours of the Test arena, which is more demanding than ever actually now.
3 people have lost their jobs this week, Tom. The ECB currently doesn't have a permanent chairman.
Yeah.
You'll be realistic enough to know that there are certain people calling for you to resign. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think there's an enormous amount of work to do. We've had a very difficult few months, no question about that, and it's on and off the field issues that have combined to create a very difficult period for English cricket. But I'm absolutely motivated and focused on getting the job done, getting through this period and setting us back on a course that English cricket fans will be much more comfortable with.
Does that mean that you see yourself in this job for the foreseeable future?
I think for now, I'm in this job and focused on delivering what I need to deliver to get the game back to where it needs to be.
And confident you have the support to do that?
I'm confident I have the support to do that.
The changes implemented by Strauss and Harrison come on the back of an awful run for the England men's team, which has seen them win only one of their past 14 Test matches, including that 4-0 defeat in Australia. BBC cricket correspondent Jonathan Agnew has seen them all and was in Australia to witness England's Ashes hammering. He's been reflecting on a dramatic week for English cricket.
Well, these clearly are unprecedented times. Certainly, I don't think there would have been 3 sackings in 3 days and 3 such high-profile sackings too. The boss, the main man, the director of cricket, Ashley Giles. Then the next day, the head coach, Chris Silverwood. And then today, his assistant, Graham Thorpe, all going within just a fortnight or so of the Ashes actually ending. So you can't really say that the ECB at the moment are letting the grass grow under their feet. I think the most interesting comments, and I put them in plural so far, from Andrew Strauss, was one that I think that we all agreed at the time, was it was impossible for Chris Silverwood to have this role landed upon him, in which he's in charge of everything. Red ball, white ball, and being solely responsible for the performances is way too much for one person. And Andrew Strauss was quite right in saying that actually more voices, more input has to be a healthy thing. And that is definitely the case in this situation. And I'm thinking in terms, particularly I think from that, of the selection mistakes that were made in Australia. So we can certainly expect, I think, a real division of labour. There might well be two separate coaches altogether again, with a test coach and a one-day coach in charge of their own areas, if you like, but with more people adding some thoughts, some input is exactly what you need in that sort of situation. The sackings are interesting, but it's got to go deeper than that. There has to be a whole structural change and a complete change of outlook by the ECB. The other day, England's women were playing Australia in that fantastic test match in Canberra, and what pops up in the middle of it? The fixtures for the 100 this summer. I mean, it just shows, I think, how completely wrong the balance is within the ECB. I mean, who in their right mind thought that was the right time in that terrific test match to put out with all guns blazing the fixtures for the 100? It's precisely that mindset within the ECB that has to change. It's more than just sacking people who the coaches. It's the whole mindset, the structure of the game that has to change. And I'm pleased to see that Andrew Strauss agrees with that. He said he's talked to people about the structure of the game, and he's aware, he knows himself, that it is not fit for purpose at the moment. So that has to change. Interesting, there's nothing as yet on the bowling side. It may be that one or two bowling coaches, John Lewis and co, are looking a bit anxiously over their shoulder, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I mean, I think now, with Root confirmed as captain, and that would have been his decision to make. I don't think that the board would have sacked him, or Andrew Strauss would have sacked him. But Root, I think, seems to have cleared his mind, and he's shown that he's determined to carry on. And so we wait and see now who this interim coach will be. And then, of course, in the longer term, who the full-term coach will be. And that's going to be a really interesting appointment. Tom Harrison, he says, is right for English cricket for him to carry on. Well, there'll be a lot of people who will be a little bit uncertain about those words, given that he is presiding over this and has been now for some time, and not just cricket on the field, as it were, but, of course, all the off-field issues as well. And I'll suggest that Tom Harrison, the chief executive, is very much under pressure at the moment, and he has to see these changes through. It's been on his watch that there's been this massive building up of one-day cricket and the emphasis on that, and it has to be, if he's going to stay, it has to be on his watch that the balance changes back again to what people really ultimately do care about, and that is about Test cricket.